let's have a short prayer. May I request Sandra to lead us in prayer?
Dear God, thank you for looking after our school. Thank you that you love each other and every one of us here. Help us to learn, play, and share together so that the wonderful world you have made becomes more beautiful every day. Amen.
Amen. Before taking your seats, please align your chairs and pick up the pieces of paper under your chairs. Okay, so now you may take your seats. Class Secretary, please record the attendance for today. Thank you. Okay, now please pass your assignment sideward and then forward. Okay, sideward and then forward. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Class, before we start our discussion, I will flash some pictures and after that, you will give comments to what have you observed. And now, I will show the pictures. Yes, Keziah. Okay, you notice that there are some resemblance between each pictures. Very good observations. So, now why do you think there are people who resembles each other? Yes, Aya. Okay, because they share the same genes. Yes, Tanya. You're raising your hand. Okay, they share the same DNA. Okay, both you are correct. So, the idea behind the pictures I flashed earlier is related to our topic for today. So, our lesson for today is all about DNA and RNA.
And here are the objectives. At the end of the lesson, at least 75% of the students can identify the basic parts of a nucleotide, compare the structures of the DNA from RNA molecule, and construct a simple DNA and RNA model.
First, let us discuss the nucleic acid. It is one of the 4 categories of biomolecules that function as information molecules. So why do we call it information molecules? Okay, yes, Aaron. It is called information molecules because it stores all the genetic code and information we have in our body. So you're right, thank you so much. So every polymer of nucleic acid is a monomer of nucleotides. Remember that thing? Every polymer of nucleic acid is monomer of nucleotides. So, what are the 3 basic parts of nucleotides? Yes, Jaira. Okay, the 3 basic parts of nucleotides are first, sugar backbone, second, the phosphate group, and third is the nitrogenous bases. You're correct. So let's discuss first the sugar backbone. The sugar that makes up the backbone of DNA molecules is called deoxyribose. It is a 5-carbon sugar that interpersed with the phosphate group, forming a repeating pattern. Okay, so number 2, the phosphate group is a functional group or a compound that gives a carbon chain or ring a particular function, made up of phosphorus attached to 4 oxygen molecules. Number 3, the nitrogenous bases. The nitrogen bases are nitrogen-bearing compounds. Okay, and those found in DNA molecules are called adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine. Again, adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine. So in short, AGTC. For other information, so adenine and guanine are called purines because they have a double carbon ring, while cytosine and thymine are called pyrimidines and have a single carbon ring. So I think you will tackle it more in senior high school. Now, can you give examples of nucleic acid? Yes. Okay. DNA and RNA. Very good, Dylan. So what is your idea about DNA? DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Again, deoxyribonucleic acid. That's right, Sia. As you can see, there is phosphate, deoxyribose sugar, and that nitrogenous base. Okay, where do you think we can find our DNA? Yes, Tasha. Okay, DNA is located inside the nucleus of our cells. Okay, excellent. And now, did you know that your DNA could stretch from Earth to the sun and back? 600 times. Okay, if unwounded and linked together, the strands of DNA in each of your cells would be 6 feet long. Okay, 6 feet long. With 100 trillion cells in your body, that means if all your DNA were put end to end, okay, it would stretch over 110 billion miles. That's hundreds of round trips to the sun. Okay, it's amazing. It's awesome. So, okay, let's move on. Aside from DNA, RNA is another example of nucleic acid. What does RNA stands for? Yes, Angel. Okay, RNA means ribonucleic acid. Okay, here are the structures of RNA. It's like DNA, but the sugar is ribose. Okay, ribose sugar. Okay, so RNA is made inside the nucleus, but it goes out to the cytoplasm because it is where it is needed to make proteins. So the question is, why is it important that our body is producing enough proteins? Okay, I think that all your answer is correct. So protein is important for growth and development of our body. Ribonucleic acid is like DNA. They are both nucleic acid. However, RNA structure is different from DNA structure in 3 ways. So first, RNA is single-stranded, while DNA is double-stranded. Second, the sugar in RNA is ribose, while in DNA is deoxyribose. And finally, both DNA and RNA contains 4 nitrogenous bases, but instead of thymine, RNA contains a similar base called uracil or letter U. So the uracil pairs with adenine. Okay? Remember that thing? Uracil pairs with adenine. The major types of RNA includes messenger RNA or mRNA, ribosomal RNA or rRNA, and transfer RNA or tRNA. To further understand this topic, please watch this short video clip about DNA and RNA.
Sometimes it feels like DNA gets all the credit. Yes, the structure of DNA is amazing. It has a beautiful double helix structure, a twisted ladder, it has its own emoji. DNA stores genetic information and codes for your traits. However, sometimes what gets left out is how important RNA is. Without RNA, you actually couldn't get that genetic message out to your cells so that they can start producing proteins. We talk about this in protein synthesis. RNA is a very important biomolecule, just as important as DNA. In fact, RNA is even hypothesized as coming first, before DNA, in the RNA world hypothesis, something we need to make a separate video about. So let's compare and contrast DNA with RNA. First, you will find DNA and RNA in all living organisms. In eukaryotic cells, DNA tends to be found in the nucleus, while you can find RNA both inside and outside of the nucleus. Prokaryotic cells don't have a nucleus. Both DNA and RNA are nucleic acids, which are a type of biomolecule. Nucleic acids have a monomer, which, if you remember from our biomolecules video, a monomer is a building block. The monomer for nucleic acids is a nucleotide, so both DNA and RNA have nucleotides. The nucleotides of both RNA and DNA have 3 parts: a phosphate, sugar, and a base. Let's draw 6 nucleotides of DNA and 6 nucleotides of RNA. DNA is generally double-stranded, and if focusing on these 2 strands of nucleotides here, you can see they run anti-parallel to each other. RNA is generally single-stranded, so you are just seeing one strand here. The sugar in DNA is deoxyribose, and the sugar in RNA is ribose. This makes sense because DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. That's helpful to know because the deoxyribose is a sugar, and nucleic acid is that type of biomolecule it is. RNA stands for ribonucleic acid, as its sugar is ribose. The bases in DNA are adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. It helps to remember the popular mnemonic apples in the tree. That helps you remember that A goes with T, and car in the garage, so C goes with G, to understand how DNA bases pair. The bases in RNA are adenine, uracil, guanine, and cytosine. Notice the different one? It's uracil. So you have to change that popular mnemonic device here. Instead of apples in the tree, maybe the apples are under. Car in the garage still works, though. We mentioned earlier that DNA codes for your traits, but it couldn't do that without RNA's help. In our protein synthesis video, we talk about 3 different types of RNA and their very important roles. mRNA, which stands for messenger RNA, mRNA's job is to carry a message based off of the DNA. In eukaryotic cells, DNA generally stays in the nucleus, but mRNA has the ability to leave the nucleus to take the message to a ribosome. Ribosomes make protein, and RNA is actually a major component of ribosomes. This type of RNA is called rRNA, which stands for ribosomal RNA. Finally, we discussed transfer RNA, or abbreviated tRNA. Its job is to transfer amino acids to match the correct mRNA codon. Codon charts using mRNA codons have been developed so that you can actually see which amino acid is brought for each mRNA codon. When those amino acids are joined together, they make a polypeptide chain. Proteins are made of one or more of these polypeptide chains, and proteins have tons of different roles. But we don't want to spoil it. Check out more in our protein synthesis video. Before we go, let's try a little 3-question quiz, shall we? Just pause it after the question so that you have time to think about it. Question 1. If I have 8 DNA nucleotides, how many DNA bases do I have? And also, how many base pairs? The answer: each nucleotide, regardless of whether it's a DNA or RNA nucleotide, has a phosphate, sugar, and a base. So 8 DNA nucleotides would have 8 bases. DNA bases pair like this, and that's 4 DNA base pairs. Question 2. If one strand of DNA has these bases shown here, ATTGAC, can you complete what the complementary DNA bases would be for the other DNA strand? The answer. So remember those base pairing rules for DNA and the popular mnemonic. If placing the bases in this image, reading in the direction shown on this image, they'd be TAACTG. Question 3. In a process known as transcription, a complementary RNA strand called messenger RNA has to complement the DNA. More about that in our protein synthesis video. So if I still had the original portion of DNA here, what would be the complementary RNA bases? The answer. So remember, it's asking for RNA. No thymine here, it's uracil instead. Apples under helps you remember A with U. Car in the garage helps you remember C with G. So in this portion, reading in the direction shown on this image, we'd have these RNA bases. Notice the answer is similar to the last answer, but there are uracil bases here instead of thymine. One last thing. Our models here, they're unable to show the beautiful 3D shape, the exact numbers of bases per turn, the chirality, but we've left you some links to explore because the goal of our videos is always to introduce the topic so that you can discover all the fascinating details and exceptions. Check out our further reading description to keep that curiosity going. Well, that's it for the Amoeba Sisters, and we remind you to stay curious.
I think you really understand this awesome topic. So now class, you will compare DNA from RNA based from our discussion. So who will volunteer? Difference between DNA and RNA. Yes, Clara. Okay, please recite. Okay, very good. DNA is double-stranded, while RNA is a single-stranded. Also, DNA base pair are adenine pair with thymine, cytosine 2 guanine, while RNA base pairs are adenine pairs with uracil. Okay, not thymine. Then cytosine pairs with guanine. So, third, DNA is located inside the nucleus while RNA is in the cytoplasm. And lastly, sugar for DNA is deoxyribose while the sugar for RNA is ribose. Okay, great job. So, now for your group activity, group yourselves into 5 and get your science module and open it on pages 266 to 268. Then answer the activity 1 entitled Getting to Know the DNA and RNA Structure. Okay, so after answering, each group will report their answer in front. Okay, but each group will choose a representative to report. Don't worry about that thing. Okay? So I will give you 10 minutes to do this activity. So the score of group 1 is 45 out of 50, group 2 is 42, group 3 is 48, group 4 is 40, and group 5 is 46. So keep it up, okay? So for our quiz, okay, so we have a quiz. So get a 1/4 sheet of paper. Okay, so I will read the direction. So read the following sentence carefully. So choose the letter that corresponds your answer. Okay, I will flash the quiz. Okay, so now let's check. Exchange your paper with your seatmate and write corrected by. So number 1, who wants to answer? Okay, the sugar backbone of RNA is called? Letter D, you're right, Claire. Ribose. Okay, number 2, which of the following is correct base pairing for DNA strand? So the answer is letter D again. Okay, adenine pairs with thymine and cytosine pairs with guanine. So let's proceed to number 3. The following are the basic parts of nucleotides except. So the answer is letter D. Okay, adenosine. Why adenosine? Okay, you're right. Okay, the basic parts of nucleotides are phosphate group, sugar backbone, and nitrogenous bases. Okay. And number 4, which biomolecule is known as information molecules and holds your genetics? We discussed it. Okay, and the answer is letter D, nucleic acid. And last number, which of the following is the correct base pairing for RNA strand? Okay, the answer is letter C. Adenine pairs with uracil and cytosine pairs with guanine. Okay, so who got 5? Okay, very good. 4. Good. 3, 2, 1, 0. I hope no one gets 0. Okay, so please pass your paper. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, for your assignment, do an advanced reading about central dogma of molecular biology and define the following terms. Number 1, DNA replication. Number 2, RNA transcription. And number 3, protein translation. And also, I will give you a group project and you need to do it for 3 weeks. Okay, so your project is you need to construct a 3D model of DNA. So next meeting, I will give the project criteria. Okay? Okay, so is everything clear? Okay, before I forgot, for those students who participate today, I will give all of you an additional points for our incoming lab test. Okay? So any questions? Clarifications? Violent reaction? Okay, if not, thank you and I hope you learned something new today. God bless you. Bye!